A terminally ill young man receives a donor heart at the last moment. When he finds out who it came from, he can hardly believe it. Max heard a noise and slowly opened his eyes. He tried to get his bearings. The last thing he remembered was the bright lights of the operating room. But this was not the operating room. This was his hospital room. "Congratulations," said the doctor, who was just coming in the door. "You came through the surgery very well." Very slowly, Max realized what had happened. He'd already had the operation, and that meant that now a new heart was beating in his chest. The healthy heart of a stranger. Max listened for the regular heartbeat. How unusual! But before he could think about it further, his mother came rushing in the door. She had puffy eyes, as she had been crying a lot, no doubt because of him. Max began to feel guilty. "Is everything all right with my son?" the mother asked the doctor. The doctor nodded, and Max wrestled a smile to reassure her. "It's a miracle he lived to be 23 with his old heart," the doctor said. "But with his new one, he now has the best chance of becoming a happy old man someday." With that, the heart surgeon took his leave, leaving mother and son to each other. "Is everything all right?" the mother asked her son. Max had had a sick heart since birth and had always been dependent on her help. She couldn't believe that he was now a healthy young man. They talked for a long time until the mother was reassured. She sent greetings from his father, who was abroad on business. He'd been checking on him constantly by cell phone. "You must be very exhausted. Get some sleep." Alone again, Max began to ponder. He wondered to whom his new heart had belonged before. Who had died so he could live? He knew that the doctor was not allowed to give any information about that, but the desire to thank the donor's family became overwhelming. Just before he was discharged from the hospital, Max mustered up the courage to ask the question. "I can get into tremendous trouble," replied the surgeon who had operated on Max. But Max did not give in. He promised not to tell anyone who provided the donor's name. The doctor sighed. He'd known Max for many years and had examined him again and again, and finally had him put at the top of the recipient list for a new heart. "I understand your wish. I wouldn't feel any differently," the doctor said. "But I'm afraid I just can't do that." With that, he left the room. However, he left some papers on the table as if by chance. Max rose from his bed. It was very difficult for him. His muscles were still weak. But he made it to the table, and indeed he found the name and address of the donor in the papers. He quickly took a picture of the document with his cell phone. No sooner was Max back in bed than the doctor came back into the room. "Oh, I guess I forgot," he said, looking back at his papers. At that, he winked at Max, and Max winked back. Back home, Max was cared for by his mother like a little child. For many years, she had cared for him in this way, which was necessary and right because of his illness. But now, he was a healthy man who was visibly regaining his strength. But all protesting was of no use. His mother hardly allowed Max to go outside the door. He understood her concern, but he was eager to meet the donor's family. When his mother went shopping, he finally snuck out of the house. As a precaution, he had left a note on the kitchen table. After all, he didn't want her to get too upset. Now, he got on the bus. His new heart was beating up to his neck when he rang the doorbell. It took a long time before a frail old woman opened the door for him. "What do you want?" she asked sullenly. Max gave his name and the reason for his visit. At that point, the woman almost slammed the door in his face again. "Please," Max said, "I owe it to her son that I'm alive." The old woman pursed her mouth. "And for you to live and my son to die." That wasn't entirely fair, but Max didn't let on. Finally, the woman did let him in. "I'm bored anyway, so you might as well entertain me," she said, no longer quite so nasty. Max took a seat on the couch and began to talk about his life, that he had always been weak because of his heart condition. While the girls watched the boys in gym class, he remained seated on the bench. He'd never done a pull-up in his life, never played a soccer game. In his free time, he sat on the computer and played games. In the virtual world, he could be a healthy person just like anybody else. You're nothing athletically, you're nothing professionally, and there's nothing with the girls either. The old woman laughed derisively. Max winced. How could the donor's mother be so vicious? But he remained seated and asked about her son. It turned out that Igor was a professor at the university, a handsome and very popular man of 40 years. Max involuntarily thought that it would have been better for mankind if the other had survived and not him. But as fate would have it, a drunken youth rammed Igor's car. The boy got away with a few bruises, but Igor died in the hospital. As if he had foreseen his fate, he had filled out an organ donor card just a few weeks before. This saved Max's life because it was high time for a heart transplant. The doctors would not have given him another year. At that point, Lisa entered the apartment to check on her grandmother. "And who is this?" she asked as she eyed Max. He introduced himself and gave the reason for his visit. Lisa smiled. "I'm glad a part of my father lives on and was able to help you," she said. Max was amazed at how friendly the young woman was, so different from her grandmother. The old woman looked grim again and did not want to wave when Max said goodbye. Instead, Lisa accompanied him to the street. Max asked shyly if they could perhaps meet sometime. "I would like to know more about your father," he quickly added. Lisa smiled and gave him her number. On the bus, Max wanted to save Lisa's number on a cell phone. Then he noticed that he had more than 20 calls. Because he'd put the phone on silent, he hadn't noticed any of them. All the calls were from his mother. She was in a tizzy because her son had been gone so long and not returned his calls. He quickly wrote an apology, and 20 minutes later he was back in the apartment. "I'm not a sickly child now," Max said when his mother had calmed down a bit. "I'm a healthy young man who can take care of himself." His mother replied that she knew that well, but it would probably take a while for her to get used to it. When Max told her about his trip, however, she turned white as a sheet. He had to make her a coffee before she could tell him why. She knew that Igor. Very well, in fact. A little over 20 years ago, she was a student at the university where Igor taught, and they were having an affair, even though Igor was already with his wife. "A moment of weakness," said Max's mother, and when she saw how Max began to calculate in his head, she said, "Yes, you may be Igor's son. The affair was over very quickly, and I already met your father." Thoughts were whirling through the young man's head. Did he carry the heart of his biological father? And as for Lisa, whose beauty he had noticed very well, in reality, is she his sister? Max had hoped for something more than just information about Igor from a meeting with her. That's why it took weeks before he had plucked up the courage to call Lisa. They met in a park on a beautiful summer day, and of course, Lisa wanted to know why Max was just calling now. "Is it because of my grandma?" she asked. Max didn't want to say anything bad about Lisa's grandmother, so he decided to come out with the whole truth, that yes, he could understand her bad mood. He, Max, was possibly the product of her son's affair. And Lisa, he then said with audible regret, might have been his sister. Lisa laughed, liberated, and gave him a long kiss on the lips. "And I thought you didn't like me," she exclaimed. When Max looked at her questioningly, there was another kiss right away. "You silly boy, I can't be your sister," declared Lisa. "I'm adopted." They then fell happily into each other's arms. Max never checked who his biological father was. "I have two fathers," he used to say, the one who raised him and the other one carried in his heart. Soon he came into his own and became a successful computer game programmer. After 2 years, he married Lisa, and they became a happy family. Do you think it was just an incredible coincidence that brought Max a new heart and his great love at the last moment? Or could there be more to it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.